Hi, welcome to Bari Nation, where we support the bariatric community with humor, humility, and honesty.
You've just tuned into a podcast that welcomes you into a community, a resource center, and a safe place that powers your journey towards personal wellness.
Our goal is you leave us today feeling hopeful, inspired, and ready to live your best bariatric life.
What is the Bari Nation membership community? Well, it's a network of experts and peers where you can connect with the support, education, and resources you need in the moment to move through your bariatric life with confidence. Almost every day, you can attend bariatric support groups led by licensed mental health professionals, classes taught by credentialed experts, and meetups that are grounded in accountability and fun. Become a member today and tap into kind and caring support. Join us at barination.mn.co.
All right, you guys, today we have a wonderful topic, a wonderful guest joining us today. We're really going to be diving into unrealistic or realistic expectations and what those can look like pre-op and post-op. And we have a lot of awesome questions. And before we do, I would love, Dr. Tan, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, thanks so much for having me. My name's Mimi Tan. You can call me Mimi. I'm a bariatric surgeon. So I practice in Seattle, Washington. I'm from the area originally, kind of trained all over, and now and in practice here. I do bariatric surgery pretty much 100% of the time. My practice is almost entirely bariatric surgery. I absolutely love my job and working with my patients. I do, everything from the sleeve to the gastric bypass. I do revisions. I also do endoscopic bariatric procedures as well. And then I've also kind of started incorporating medication as well, like anti-obesity medications in my practice too. So a little bit of everything. Love talking about this. I'm very excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you. We actually stumbled upon you on Instagram, and we love your content. It's so relatable from our patient perspective. We have, surgeon friends who have also, enjoyed your content. You just keep it real. Honestly, you keep it so real. And we just know that that's going to carry over to today's conversation. We're hoping to have fun. We're hoping to learn and maybe break some of those myths that we think about when it comes to those unrealistic expectations with bariatric surgery.
Yeah, a lot of them. There's a lot of them.
So many.
Meaty topic.
It's a big one. It's a big one. And if you are not yet a patron and or a Bari Nation support community member, we're going to be diving in even more after this in our bonus episode that we have almost every single week. If you would like to hop on over there, you can support the podcast by going to barinationpodcast.com. Or if you want to just dive into the membership community, you can go to barination.mn.co. We have a lot more support. We have conversations like this every single day.
All right. So, Dr. Tan, what common unrealistic expectations do you see patients having for recovery and their life after surgery?
So, I think probably the most common unrealistic expectation that I see in my patients when I first meet them is that life after surgery is going to be easy, that weight loss is going to be easy. And this comes from, we hear this all the time, surgery, medications, whatever. This is the easy way out. You're cheating, you're doing whatever. Like this is just, it's something that you are skipping a bunch of steps to get to this ultimate goal, right? And I hear this all the time. And even if you don't necessarily think that like surgery is the easy way out, or you think that it's cheating, I think people underestimate how challenging it is to live life after bariatric surgery, how much work it takes every single day to kind of stay on track and be doing the right things. Obesity, it's a chronic disease. Surgery certainly helps address the issue, but it does not magically take care of the issue by any means. And so I think that's probably the number one thing that I do have to like reset for patients before surgery. I think about this all the time, actually, because one of like my least favorite things that I hear from patients after surgery is when they tell me that they're surprised, because I never want my patients to feel unpleasantly surprised after surgery, and even if it's a small thing, like a common one is like, oh, I was surprised that I was so constipated after surgery. Like, I don't like hearing, because it sucks to be constipated after surgery, like you have your incisions that are healing and then you can't poop and it's just a horrible feeling. It's really awful. And like, I'm like, oh shoot, why didn't I prepare you for that better? So that you could have like been ready for that after surgery, right? And so I think that like setting some of those expectations is incredibly important. That's probably one of the big ones that I do have to reset. I think I'm so excited to be talking about this topic because there's this paper that came out actually recently from the Netherlands that I've been thinking a lot about. And in this paper, they looked at patients who had bariatric surgery. Then they sent them a questionnaire at 1 year. And in this questionnaire, they asked basically questions about like, how much did you regret bariatric surgery, right? And there were some patients, like, there were like 2 patients out of over 100 that were like, I absolutely regret it, right? We don't really know the details about that. But then 50% of people were like, I don't regret anything, like 0 regrets. And then everyone else kind of fell in between, right? Like between mild regret to some moderate regret or even strong regret. And I've been thinking about that so much. And I actually looked up the questionnaire and I kind of went through it myself, not for bariatric surgery, but like, how do I feel about becoming a doctor, right? And I actually scored in like the mild to strong regret kind of category. And if you actually asked me, like, do you regret becoming a doctor? Do you regret becoming a surgeon? I would say no. Like, I really love my job. I love that I became a doctor, but my journey here has been complicated. My journey every single day is complicated. Life after surgery is complicated too, right? It's life. Life is so complicated, and people are going to have complicated thoughts about their journeys as well. I think that's kind of the issue here, is how do we kind of sit in thinking about all those complications and all those like intricacies of surgery, and how do we really reset patients in a way where they can feel better about it after surgery? I think that's absolutely key, is setting those expectations. So again, this is super cool that we're talking about it, I think.
Well, and I also think it would depend on when that questionnaire was filled out, or like at what stage of post-op recovery are we talking, to people about these things, because there are a lot of people that have some buyer's remorse pretty quick after, or maybe in the first like month or two, with constipation, with not being able to eat, having to learn, you're still maybe on the tail ends of the liquid diet and you just want to chew something. Like all spectrums. So we completely understand that portion of it. But why do you think patients go into their surgery having these unrealistic expectations?
Yeah, I think anyone who has struggled with obesity or weight issues for most of their lives have kind of carried around a lot of baggage, whether or not that's emotional baggage, healthcare baggage, like just so many different things, right? And so there are so many things that we attach to our weight. And there's so many things that then get attached to how we handle our weight and how we deal with our weight going into things. There are also just a lot of, I think, misunderstandings about surgery in a lot of ways. And so I think people bring all of that to them when they first start this journey. And it's so hard to like dig through and like really reset everything when we have fairly limited time together, right? Like I do this all day, every single day. And so I've, worked with hundreds of patients and I've had all that experience with them. It's really hard to try to convey all of that experience into a person in a relatively short amount of time. So it's very difficult, but I think it is important to try to do as much as possible in the run up to surgery.
I think that's really wonderful that you said that. I know for myself, 2020, before I was having my surgery, I wanted all of the information. I had all of these preconceived notions of surgery, and the best way to battle it was finding people on Instagram, listening to podcasts, listening to people who have been through it, share their experiences. And I think that's where these conversations just come into play, is we can set the realistic expectations up front so that people aren't shocked after. We lead a lot of groups in the Variation support community that, and Jason and I were just talking about this before we were recording. Oh, I didn't know I wasn't going to be able to eat, this much, or maybe I'm eating too much. There's all this information out there, all of these personal stories being shared, and people still have these preconceived notions of what life after surgery is actually like. So I'm glad that you did that.
Yeah. And I think it's really important going into surgery, knowing yourself and like how much information you like to have before something, right? And how prepared you like to be in most life situations. There are certainly people who are very much just like, I'm going to roll with the punches as I move forward. Right. But if you're like me, like I want to know everything. I'm like you, Natalie. I want to know all of the things. And so if you are that type of person, I think it's so important to just like really dig in deep as early as possible, try to like get into it as much as possible so that you are as prepared as you can for after surgery. And also just realize that like, no matter how much you prepare, like there are going to be surprises. I mean, I like, do you guys agree? Like, is there anything that you could have done to fully 100% prepare yourself for after surgery? Like I think there are always going to be challenges that you're just going to run into to some degree.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Like Natalie hosts a pre-op and newly post-op group in the Berry Nation community. And while people will say going in, they feel more prepared than they would have any other time, and they have amazing questions and they really feel ready to go, there are still, and that's a slow ramp up. Like that's a once a week, like everybody comes in. So it's really not just a one-time brain dump. Like when they come in for their first like consultation, and it's just like, here's all of the things you need to know. And people are like, what? like me, I absorbed absolutely none of it. I went in, my doctor was like, hey, what surgery do you want to have? And I was like, isn't that your job? Like, you got the white coat? Like, I don't know. I was like, I skipped that day in medical school. I have no idea. Like, I don't know what works for me. It was just funny the way, like, he thought it was hilarious because he was like, well, I guess that's kind of true. He's like, well, what have you been researching? I was like, I only know there's two kinds. So I was like, I have no idea. And then kind of the more we got to talking about the intricacies of both, it was funny the way he broke it down for me. But it really does make sense. Like, even though we slow roll and ramp patients up into it for the pre-op and newly post-op, there are still things that people just don't think to ask or think to know, or things that pop up because not everybody's different. Like, everybody goes through something a little bit different. So
yeah, absolutely.
And I think we touched on this earlier, and that this leads me into my next question is, life after surgery is so vast. I mean, it's life, right? Like, this is a new way of living. So truly nothing can fully prepare you, because nothing's ever going to prepare you for life either. And I think we have this misconception there, obviously, going into bariatric surgery. But when someone comes to you or is entering this pre-op phase, or they're getting ready to have their surgery, how do you set them up for the best success? Like, what are things that maybe not all surgeons are preparing their patients for? What are some things that are important for you?
Yeah. Actually, when I first meet any patient, I always warn them up front. I'm like, this is a big visit. We go through a lot of information. Buckle your seatbelt. We're going to do a lot. And we go through so much. We have to talk through all the surgeries. We have to like talk through all of your history. Like, there's just so much that we have to get through. But I actually think that like one of the most important questions that I ask during that visit is, what do you hope to achieve with weight loss? Or what do you hope to achieve with this surgery? What are your goals? And I get so many different answers to that, right? There's the common ones like, okay, I want to get rid of my diabetes. I want to improve my overall health. I want to stay healthy. I want to stay active, like all these different things, right? But you also just get so many wide-ranging responses to that And a lot of people have like a weight goal in mind that they want to hit as well, right? That's pretty common. And that's an easy one that I start with is like, how likely are we going to actually get to your weight goal, that number that you have in your head with this surgery, right? Because what surgery sometimes cannot do is it cannot get you to this X number like that you really want. Like there is a certain amount of weight that we typically expect to see with surgery. And that's often a surprise for patients during this first visit because it sometimes is not as much as they may be expected before surgery. And if we don't have that discussion up front, that's only going to lead to disappointment and kind of unhappiness afterwards as well. And so I really like to set that expectation up front of like, this is how much weight we realistically can achieve with surgery. And this is how likely we are to actually get to your goal. And then sometimes as well, I like to actually kind of talk about that number that some people have attached in their head as well, and where that number came from for people, because maybe that number is just something that some doctor at some point told you this is the weight you need to be at to be healthy. And, I think sometimes we need to question that number a little bit. Like, are you actually going to be happy and healthy at this weight? Like maybe it's actually 40 pounds heavier and that was a weight that you were at 20 years ago and you felt good and you felt happy. And maybe that's not a normal BMI, so to speak, but that is the goal that we should work towards. And so we sometimes have that conversation as well. And then, sometimes too, people I think they have this unrealistic expectation that losing weight is going to fix all of their problems in life. And again, this comes from years of weight has been such a big issue that you've struggled with for so long. This is a universal experience for most of my patients, right? And it's along with that, you attach so many other things to it. And if I get a sense that, you are expecting more than what I can promise with this surgery, I really like to sit there and say, like, we are not going to maybe fix all of like your relationship with X, Y, and Z. Maybe like I'm not going to be able to fix depression, anxiety, like all these mental health things that can come along with obesity as well. And so there's a lot that we can achieve with surgery, but there are a lot of things that we can fall short at. And so I like to have that conversation early on as well with my patients. And then I think it's important to kind of go over it like as we move forward as well. But that's kind of the beginning part of like setting expectations, I think, in a lot of ways.
That's awesome, though, that you mentioned that. My surgeon kind of did the same thing for me. He let me know, like in no uncertain terms, he's like, look, your age, your weight, your highest weight that you're at, he's like, sleeve's not going to do it. He goes, it'll get you started. He's like, but we will have to come back for a revision. And of course, myself, I'm stubborn. So I was like, not me. I'm going to make the sleeve work and I'm going to do all the things. And then my body was like, yeah, that's cute. But yeah, no, it's really good that you mentioned, setting those for people because there are a lot of things that people come into. And like you had said, like people do attach this magic number and all that does, like they don't realize that they're setting themselves up for, just kind of such a hard time for themselves because they, we're the hardest critics on ourselves. So if we don't hit that magic number in this magical time frame that we decided to make it like, oh, if I don't hit this in 6 months, then I've ruined everything. And it's horrible to see people go through that when they don't have to. And I'm just so glad that you talk about, making that a point to point that out to people because it is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, one thing I hear from a lot of people is, or maybe I don't hear it, but I kind of sense it, is this fear of failure after surgery. I think that's huge. It's like, and yeah, and right. It totally makes sense, right? Because you've tried so many things and you're like, okay, surgery is now this option here. I can't fail this option, right? And then it's like you have to ask, what is failure? And did you actually fail? Like sometimes I'm like, well, this is actually what I was expecting with surgery. This is a success in my mind. Like, why do you see this as a failure? And that's a conversation that I'll often have with patients after surgery when they come to me feeling like they failed. And I'm like, again, it's complicated. It's super complicated.
It's so complicated. I literally just had a conversation in my beginner bariatrics meetup last night with a member who, is a couple months out of surgery and not feeling like they're losing enough, right? And I use that term very loosely, and is terrified of the thought of adding in, GLP-1 medications or whatever that may be, revision. Obviously, my advice to her from a patient perspective is like, okay, let's give it some time to see like what pans out. And at the same time, I said, so does what's the fear of these medications? And, they said failure means that the surgery has failed and now I have to do something else. And I'm like, obesity in itself, and this may be derailing us a little bit, but obesity itself is a complex disease. And like your disease might just need more treatment like mine did. And like you said, Dr. Tan, like, what is this failure? Like, why are we afraid of this so-called failure here? It's a really interesting topic, and I'm really glad that you have that conversation with your patients because I think that it's needed.
Yeah, I think, and that's why I think when that first meeting, there's only so much that your mind absorbs, but I do try to be like, okay, this is what I expect. This would be a success in my mind with this surgery, so that hopefully you don't think to yourself, if you don't exceed that expectation, that you're failing, right? But it's not uncommon that I see patients after surgery when I tell them that they're not doing anything wrong to cause this, so to speak, like you just feel like the weight lifted off your shoulders from having someone tell you that. So I think in all of that, another thing that people run into is this fear of failure. You also fear sharing that failure with your providers as well. And for the longest time, as a doctor or as a surgeon, we always say like, no news is good news, right? Like, okay, if I haven't heard from my patient, I'm going to assume that it's good. But I don't think that's actually the case in bariatric surgery. Sometimes no news makes me worry. And so like touch base a lot, touch base as much as you can. We want to be there for you in your successes, but also your setbacks. So it's an important piece as well.
Oh no, that's huge when it comes to, getting back in touch with your surgeon when things aren't going as well. I never spoke to my surgeon again. My surgical team, when I started gaining weight back, I never reached out. I never said a word. I sat in shame, guilt, and basically just failure mode for almost a year because I had dropped down from 470 to like 290 on my own. I technically like 283, but that was when I was doing the liquid diet with my wife before her surgery, so that didn't count because that wasn't real. The second I sniffed food again, it started coming back, so we don't count that part. But like 290 on my own, and so once I got back to 353 and I stayed there for like 9 months. But in that 9 months, I was like, well, my comorbidities are coming back. I didn't even lose all my comorbidities. This is awful. I ruined my only chance I had to succeed, and I don't deserve to have a revision or GLP-1s or anything else that are going to fix it, because if I would have done the right things the first time, I wouldn't have to do anything else, and I didn't, and so now here we are. And it wasn't until I had a conversation with another surgeon who was like, well, ran through basically, the obesity is a chronic disease. What does chronic mean? Chronic means it never goes away. And kind of ran me through like the things that I tell people all the time and wasn't telling myself, and I wouldn't hear from myself. And so it was after that point that he was like, well, so tell me again why you don't deserve to have, another tool in the toolbox that's going to help you. And it really did, like you said, like the weight lifted. It was like losing the weight all over again. The shame went away, the guilt went away, and then I became an advocate for revision so that nobody else felt the way that I felt, because I don't want anyone to sit for 9 months. Because now I think back to if I would have, stepped up and said something and not sat in this for 9 months, how much further would I be? How much better could I have felt? Like, why would it, like the mental damage and anguish I did to myself in that 9 months was very hard to come out of. And it wasn't until I started accepting, because I had sworn I would never have revision ever. I was never going to be that guy. Like, whatever happened the first time, you're not going back in. Like, have a great time. Like, it's not going to be me. And the light at the end of the tunnel that provided for me when I finally accepted the fact that I not only could be, but would be having a revision was something that I wanted to make sure that other people could find very early in that, in the shame spiral that we have when we feel like we have failed our last chance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I think things like regain or insufficient weight loss, these are things that are kind of voodoo topics sometimes, I feel like, when you go see your doctor or when you go see your surgeon. And so I think I've actually been trying more and more to start having those conversations early, right? At some of our early post-operative visits to say, like, hey, weight stalls are normal, right? Insufficient weight loss, that happens to people, right? When I give you numbers, those are averages. So there are people who lose less weight than that. Weight regain is real. I always talk about weight regain at my 1-year visits with my patients. And this is the reality of what life is like after bariatric surgery for a lot of people. And so once you kind of normalize some of that, then it, hopefully that takes away some of that shame and that fear that people have so that they can actually come and see their surgeons and get help for that. Because you're absolutely right. And with all of these things, like, earlier is going to be better. It's kind of true for any disease, right? And obesity is the same way. The earlier we kind of catch it and stop it, the better. Dealing with, like, not losing enough weight, that's going to be easier than dealing with weight regain. Dealing with a lot of weight regain is going to be harder than dealing with a lot less weight regain. So the earlier is always going to be better in these situations. And we know that a lot of people experience it. Right? I think it's hard for surgeons too to admit that they're offering a tool that is imperfect to their patients. Bariatric surgery is not perfect. I wish it were, but it is not. There's a lot of things that can happen afterwards that are not positive. And so I think it's important that we start talking about it and start normalizing it for people. That's how we move forward in life.
Yeah. So you touched on some of the realistic expectations that you give your patients for their post-op and the recovery phase. What are a couple of the other ones that you try to lay down for people?
Yeah. So I think in the early recovery phase, just from like a strict recovery standpoint, I like to talk about pain afterwards and setting relatively realistic expectations about pain. I think this is super important. And then recovery just from like an energy and getting back to like life expectations. Those are things that I like to talk about as well with people. And some of the weird things that come up, like, not necessarily weird, but, constipation, dumping syndrome, all these things that like people might need a reminder for, food intolerances. So some of those things that like we like to set some expectations for early on after surgery. We have some discussion about it prior to surgery as well. Again, I think some of the bigger things, talking about stalls, talking about kind of these bumps in the road that people might experience after surgery. I think that's important as well to set up early as well. And frequently, because I think the first time that someone hears something, it doesn't necessarily stick in your mind. So hearing it over and over and over again is helpful. So some of those really key points, I do like to, sometimes I sound like a broken record, but I do like to kind of go over it and over it and over it. That's kind of why I actually started doing social media, because I was like, I don't know if people are always just listening to me talk necessarily. So, and I know a lot of people spend time on Instagram. So like if some of that messaging gets through in that form, then great. I think another thing that we haven't really touched on in the recovery period that I think people do struggle with is comparing yourself to other people and defining your success against others. Like, every journey is different, right? And most people, or I wouldn't say most, but a lot of people having surgery, they've had friends who have had surgery, family members who have had surgery, or they're online looking at social media, doing whatever, comparing their journey to someone else's journey and defining their success or lack of success to that journey. And I think that can be harmful in a lot of ways. It can be very good in a lot of ways to have that support, but sometimes being cautious about that is really important as well. And so that's a conversation that we sometimes need to have too.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. I've been saying that since I started my journey. comparison is the thief of joy, right? That's a cliche for a reason. If I'm looking at someone's chapter 120 and I'm on chapter 3, like that's not fair to compare myself or my story or my progress to them. And I think it's important to note, like, what are you starting with? Comorbidities, age, like we've touched on this whole episode. But it is really easy with social media, with, talking to some surgeons. You have these standards of, I should be losing X amount at this time, or I should be at this weight, or this body composition at 2 years, 3 years, whatever that is. And I think, like you said, it's so important to just pause and say, well, this is where I started from. For me, it's like 403 pounds, pre-diabetic, insulin resistant, like all of these things. And yes, I still have obstacles. I have chronic illness. I'm working through all these things. But I'm also, 145 pounds less. I am more active. I have a lot less comorbidity. It's like comparing ourselves to ourselves is really the only marker that we should have. And I think that's really important.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's another important thing that often gets lost in the shuffle is like realizing how far you've come, I think people are so critical on themselves that I'm like, oh my gosh, you've lost 100 pounds. Like, this is amazing. This is an amazing thing that's happened. You have to compare yourself to where you were before, right? But it is hard. It's so hard in the world that we live in right now to be able to sit and reflect in that way sometimes.
Yeah, I always tell people the
Truly.
worst 4-letter word you can say post-op is only. I've only lost 20 pounds. I've only lost 60 pounds. I've only lost 100 pounds. I'm like, we celebrate all wins over here. I celebrate ounces. So don't come over here with I've only lost so many, because, we're going to talk about that, because I will not trust and believe. I go back and I will double weigh. If I forgot to go to the bathroom or forgot to do something before I weigh, I will go right back. I have no shame. Zero shame. I need all my ounces.
I mean, it's so important to celebrate those things, right? Yeah. And it's not all about the scale, right? Like it's every inch that you've lost is amazing. Every like non-scale victory that you've celebrated is important. I think sometimes sitting and just reflecting on some of those things are really, really important as well in this journey. So.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I know we're going to have more with you, Mimi, because this is so great. Before we wrap up, we would love to know, what is one thing that you wish our listeners, bariatric patients everywhere, knew about what life after surgery is like?
Yeah. Oh man, that is a one thing. That's a complicated. That's like trying to put a lot of things into one sentence. I think just realizing that surgery is complicated. Life after surgery is complicated. And that's okay. That there are going to be ups and there are going to be downs, and that's going to be okay, right? Surgery is not a magic wand. It's not a magic tool that is going to solve everything. It's not going to magically make the weight come off. It's a huge life change that you have to be ready to accept into your life, and that you have to have the right mindset for in order to kind of approach in the right way. It's so, so important. Again, like I think this is so important to just look at obesity as a chronic disease. It's a lifelong struggle for most people. Yes, you can maybe point at some people who have had surgery and they've never had to think about their weight ever again, but I think that is the exception. It's not the rule. Understanding that is really, really going to be important for most people. Surgery is a tool. It's an imperfect tool. There are a lot of things that come up that you might not expect, but that's okay. Like, as long as you have the support to tackle it and that you have the right mindset to be able to tackle it, and just knowing that those things are going to come up for you and that there are ways that we can help you with that, I think that's really important.
Well said. For being put on the spot, that was well said. It was well said regardless, but especially for being put on the spot.
Yes, very well done.
Yes. Well, thank you again, Mimi. This has been wonderful. Where can people find you if they would like to connect with you outside of the podcast?
Yeah, so our website for our practice is avivamd.com. If you're interested in surgery or just weight loss management in general, you can contact us through that page. I'm on Instagram, Dr.Mimi Tan. If you're interested in looking at any content, you can message me, leave comments. I try to respond to everything. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, and we'll see everyone next time. What exactly is the Berry Nation membership community? It's a network of experts and peers where you can connect with the support, education, and resources you need in the moment to move through your bariatric life with confidence. Almost every day, you can attend bariatric support groups led by licensed mental health professionals, classes taught by credentialed professionals, and fun meetups hosted by experts and peers. Become a member today and tap into a kind and caring support. Join us at barrynation.mn.co.
That wraps up another empowering episode of the Berry Nation podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, keep the conversation going by joining the Berry Nation membership community, where you can attend live support events, access on-demand resources, and find a caring community.
Join us at barrynation.mn.co. If you found this podcast valuable, help us produce it by becoming a $5 monthly supporter at barrynationpodcast.com.
And just remember, at the end of the day, you've got this, we've got you, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.